or something on the wall, and you think you've been there before, but you really haven't. You're just extrapolating the identification of that to it. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen. It does, but that's not the big issue. 80% of the time people have so-called deja vu cases. What they're doing is they're doing an age progression. You do an age progression. Remember, we go through hypnosis for 7 hours a day, 4 hours during the waking day. And then you perceive, let's say, a scene of you're going to be somewhere that you've never been before. You immediately repress it, you forget about it, and then a week goes by, you go into this place, and all of a sudden you feel a little weird, right? It's like, wow, this is really unusual. That is an age progression. So let me show you what I did. 1977, I discovered future life progression and progression therapy. So I decided to see if I can go to the future of the current situation, right? It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was in my late 20s at the time, and I was living in this apartment in Baltimore, and I had a date that evening with a new young lady, right? She was about 23 years old, whatever, and she was going to come over to my apartment. We were going to go out to a movie, you know. So I figured, let me see how this date is going to go, okay? So I did a little progression, did my little techniques, and I see myself sitting on the couch, and she's sitting on the couch, she's drinking a cup of coffee, and we're having a conversation. And I'm monitoring this conversation, and then there's one part where she said something that, you know, it's just part of a conversation. It wasn't something common. It was something unique as to what we were talking about. And I remember what she said. So I come out of trance, I take out a piece of paper, and I write about 2 sentences, which is word for word what she said, right? So I take this piece of paper, I fold it in quarters, and put it on the coffee table in my living room, right? A few hours later, she comes over to my apartment. We go out to a movie, come back to my apartment, and I said, would you like a cup of coffee? She goes, yeah. So she's now drinking a cup of coffee, exact same position during my progression earlier that afternoon. And she goes, can I ask you a question? And I said, sure, what's up? She goes, what's that piece of paper doing on the coffee table? I said, it's a surprise. I said, just wait, be patient. I'll show you what it is. She goes, okay. So we're talking, all of a sudden, now she says the exact same thing that is on that paper, right? So I said, stop. She goes, what did I do? And I said, do you remember what you just said? And she goes, yeah. I said, what did you just say? So she repeats the last 2 sentences, and I said, now pick up the paper. So she goes, what is this? And I said, I did an age, she goes, I'm out of here. On one level, it was a great technique. On another level, it was a frustrating evening, okay? Okay, now, yesterday, I was, just another thing about future, I showed you an example of Jerry Springer's past life in England when he was a knight in 1600, you know, and he was a sword fighter and saving his damsel in distress. Well, Jerry was also taking into a future life, and I document this in my soul healing book. You can read about the details, but let me give you an idea of his future life. First, let me tell you that Jerry has a problem. Now, I don't know anything about Jerry Springer before the show. I mean, I know who he was, but I don't know anything about his personal life. Jerry was telling me that in the green room before the show, we were doing the exercises. He says, you know, doctor, he says, I've got a problem. I've got a phobia that's really weird. And I said, what is that? He says, I have a fear of water and heights. And I said, well, how does that manifest? He says, well, I go to a country club. I love going to country clubs, and I like to go swimming. I said, okay. He said, I have a natural tendency to go up on the high board. And I said, well, if you got a fear of heights and water, you know, that's a toughie. He says, so what I do is I go on the high board. You know, I go up the steps. You have to climb up these steps to go on this high board. I'm up there, and I freeze. They have to get the fire department to get them down, you know? So I said, he says, I don't know what the origin of the phobia is. So I said, let's see if we can find it out. Now, they didn't televise this. They taped this, but they didn't televise it. They just picked the regression part because it was shorter. So when we did the progression, the future life progression, his name is, this is a Montana Bobby is what his name is. He's a farmer in Montana in the year about the late 21st century, about 2090. And he grows foodstuff on a moon base that we have, like a little farm up on the moon. And he's a farmer. He makes what they call sorties, or trips from the Earth to the moon, back and forth, you know, to monitor his farm, okay? So Montana Bobby, right? So I said, okay, continue on. So we go through the progression, and one fine day, he's coming back from the moon to the Earth. The ship that he's on crashes into the ocean, and he drowns. That's how he dies in 100 years, give or take. So the origin of his water phobia and his height phobia is not from the past or a past life, but from the future, because all time is simultaneous. That's quantum physics, okay? Montana Bobby. But even in the future, he has fights on his TV show. Okay. Now, when we do, just one thing, when we do the new you technique, I just want to mention a couple of things. There are some fringe benefits about going into the future, not just being able to select your ideal path so that you can manifest your ideal potential, you know, attain goals, whether it be relationships, abundance, professional things, you know, whatever. But a couple of other things. These are what I call side effects of the new you technique. Your confidence will increase, and you'll find yourself no longer worrying about the outcomes of events because you can be in control of them and you can avoid them. If you see something that's negative, choose a different frequency, or if you want to stay on the same frequency, just don't do it, you know? If you're going to go out one night and get hit by a car, stay in and watch a movie, right? See how it works? You'll receive information and ideas that you could not possibly obtain from your normal waking mind. You're going to be using your higher self now. It's creative. You know, I've written 21 books, and without sacrificing my practice, my personal life, or my tennis game. And so how do you do that? A nonfiction book is easy to write, actually, in my view, because you can write them out of order. You know, it's not like you're writing a novel. But what I do to write is efficiency, is I access my higher self, and I channel my higher self. My higher self tells me how to lay out the book, the chapters, you know, whatever, just naturally, and how to do my research. For example, I use the computer to look at the library to see books that are relevant to the field for the research part, and my higher self will say, check this book, this book, this book, and this book, and don't read these chapters, just read chapter 1, 8, and 11. So it's very efficient because I'm channeling my higher self. And when I do the writing, I actually write in a hypnotic level. Any creative person will tell you that when they're in their creative mode, whether they're writing, painting, music, whatever it is, they're really not in their normal waking state. They really can't do it that well. They have to be in an altered state of consciousness. Okay, let's do a little bit of DVD here.
Using post-hypnotic suggestion, she is counted down to her past life.
2, you are there. Number 1. All right, now, tell me the first thought that comes into your mind. What do you perceive?
See, playing in a yard.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about yourself. What do you look like?
Long blonde hair.
And about how old are you?
About 5.
And what do people call you?
Cynthia.
As our guest relives her past life, the audience gets to ask questions about the experience.
Cynthia, from where you are in the super consciousness, can you tell us what your feelings or emotions were like immediately after you died?
I don't know. I feel light, I guess.
Did you feel a relief of any discomfort? You mentioned the discomfort in your head.
Yes.
All right, now the superconscious mind tap that was just illustrated, just to review it again, just wanted to show that quick clip. She went into a past life, really wasn't the origin of the problem, but by going to training her to access her higher self, even though she was reliving her life in England 150 years ago, the raising of the quality of her soul's energy removed the energy block that was creating the migraine headaches that she had, she had for every day of her life for 9 years. And Catherine was able to overcome those migraines. And I had communication from her, at least from her friends and her people she referred, over the last 18 months to show that that was a permanent removal. The reason I mention that again is that the basis of this approach is superconscious mind tap and healing. I call this cleansing, not the information from a regression or a progression. Information is fine, it doesn't solve problems. You only solve problems by raising the soul's energy. Now here's an example of a woman who went into the future and saved her mother's life. This is Fox Television doing a depiction of Valerie. So let's see what Valerie's all about.
In a recent vision, she saw her mother's impending death. Valerie then took steps that actually changed the future.
I was boldly awakened, like boom, and I sat straight up in bed, my eyes were open. I was able to see a 3 or 4 dimensionality. It was clearer and more intense than anything I've ever seen here. I couldn't hear, but I could sense the words maternal, maternal, maternal. I was hearing with a sense that I had never thought I even had before, a sense much farther than our five senses. Then to the left side of me, I saw a picture of my mother flash on the screen. Quickly it flashed on and it came right off. And then immediately I saw myself surrounded in black, and through my entire body I had an eeriness, I had a foreboding despair. I knew she was going to die.
I didn't believe Valerie at first that it was in fact a vision. I thought it was a dream that we all have, that we all are human, we have worries, and she just fought tooth and nail that it wasn't, this was different.
I went to her and I sat down with her and I said, let me tell you something, get yourself to the doctor now. If you do not go, and if you do not change your lifestyle, you are going to die by December of this year.
How can you feel like you're going to die if you feel good? If you're going to die, you feel bad. And I didn't feel bad, so I didn't think I was going to die.
And of course I wasn't saying it matter-of-factly. I was hysterical at that time. And I said, I'm going to be with you every step of the way. You're going to live. And she just looked at me and she said, I'm going to do it. I know that you've been given this message and I'm going to do it.
Even though Valerie's mother had had a complete physical just 2 weeks before, she returned to the doctors at her daughter's insistence.
I wrote a list to the doctor saying, just do these tests and please do that test. And I know that these tests aren't warranted because there's nothing to show that there's a problem. There are no symptoms, no pain, but just do these tests, please. Well, then they found two things and they immediately scheduled surgery.
When the news came back that yes, there's a problem, I was dumbfounded. I was absolutely shocked.
They told me after they found the blood in the urine and I had the procedure, if we hadn't have done this now, you might have been on dialysis and lost a kidney. But when I came through it at that moment when he told me, that's when I realized I wouldn't be here if it weren't for Valerie.
I was able, because of some higher power, to save my mother's life. And in so doing that, I changed the life of everyone around me for the better. So we've been touched. We've definitely been touched.
Right, now Valerie's case is very, very dynamic. She was very close with her mother. She really didn't have much of a social life, although she was married and had a daughter. But she had really no friends. Her sister was, shall we say, not compatible with her. So if she was to lose her mother, she was going through what we call pre-bereavement. Well, as it turns out, her mother had a physical. Everything was fine. Now, the mother was obese. You could see she's overweight, but, and she was on blood pressure medication for hypertension. But the physician, and I'm not trying to blame the physician here for negligence, but he simply said, okay, you're all right. Your physical says, fine, I'll see you in a year. And Valerie, then we do the age progression, and it comes out that she needs to get her kidney tested. There's a real problem going on, and there's also a problem with her hypertension medication. So Valerie's mother says, leave me alone. I don't like going to doctors. I'll wait next year. And she said, no, don't do it. Valerie's a very aggressive person. And going into the future is not Valerie's top 10. She's a very conservative, straight-laced woman. Let's put it this way. When she flies from the West Coast to the East Coast, her planes only have right wings, okay? You get that? All right. She's a very conservative person. All right, so what happened was that the mother finally goes back to the physician, and they find out that she has undiagnosed 3-centimeter kidney stone. She's a medical risk because she's obese. They had to use various techniques to get rid of this, and her hypertensive or blood pressure medication was underprescribed, so she would have most likely died had something not have been done. They did emergency surgery, and she survived nicely, and she was alive last time I spoke with her, and this case was several years ago. So my point was that Valerie, because of her progressions, saw information that was critical to her mother. Her mother would have died had she not done that. Another example of saving a life. We talked about Tammy and TWA Flight 800 yesterday, so here's another example. All right, now, we're going to be doing a future life progression this afternoon, one of the latter exercises, so let's see an example of, can this be done with a bunch of people? Well, this is a TV show, NBC show called The Other Side that used to be on in America. It was more of a metaphysical talk show, so let's see what happens when you take 300 people in Burbank, California, into the future. No, not the fear, but I mean actual disease, an actual syndrome. Cancer, okay? Well, interestingly enough, in America they wouldn't say that. They would say AIDS. Now, let me tell you why I don't think that's a smart thing to think. People can do what they want. In America, here's our statistics. 78% of deaths are heart disease in one form or another. 21% is cancer. 1% is everything else. AIDS is part of the everything else, okay? So it's a very small percentage of deaths, but because of the celebrities, because of the, the ribbons they wear and all this kind of stuff, it gets all the attention. Okay, well, Mary is a school teacher, was a school teacher. She was retired on disability, and she was diagnosed with AIDS. And she was basically, now this case was done back in the early 90s, so she was going to die. The mortality rate in AIDS was, maybe 5 years max. And she doesn't know what to do. So she's panicking. She goes to her physicians, and they put her on the experimental drugs and this and that, and nothing is working. So we did progression techniques, selecting her ideal path, and soul healing to raise the immune system. It's called the CD4 count. And Mary is alive today. And this case was almost 20 years ago, and she's doing quite well. So let's see what her case looks like. Okay.
With a real trauma, and boy, is it ever. You got some pretty bad news in 1992. What happened, Mary?
In 1992, I was diagnosed with AIDS.
Progression.
Well, it wasn't all what I wanted to see. For example, I was on an experimental drug that at the time they were very hopeful about. It was being used in combination with 2 other drugs, and it had been shown in a test tube to kill the virus. They had a few patients on it, and I really wanted to see that it would work. I didn't. I saw that it would fail, and that I would be taken off of the drug and counseled by my physician about the end of the study. I also saw, though, that despite that, I would be able to tap into some unknown resource within myself, that I would experience a remission and eventually come off of the other 2 drugs that I was on. 3 months after I finished my hypnotic sessions with Dr. Goldberg, I received a letter from the director of the experimental clinic telling me that my drug, nevirapine, had been shown not to be nearly as effective as they had hoped, and that I had the right to discontinue participation in the study if I wanted to. My immune system has continued to respond positively. It's stronger than it was at the time of hypnotherapy, and I'm off of all of my antiretroviral medication now.
Another little end to the story is that in addition to Mary being alive nearly 20 years later, this is also now examples of karmic capitalism, the new technique. Remember, we went into the future with her. So what did she do? She was a retired school teacher on disability. She could never teach again, and she wanted to have some kind of a life. Now that she knows she's going to live, what does she do? Well, she developed a strong interest in metaphysics because of obviously the work we did and this and that. And so she says, I'd like to be a writer. And I said, okay. So when she went into her ideal future, not only did she live many, many years, but she became a novelist in metaphysical type of literature. And that's exactly what she did. She published her novel about 4 or 5 years after that, has written several other novels, goes on speaking tours and this and that, and gives workshops. So Mary has a new life, alive and doing something she loves to do. So as a writer, I always can appreciate people entering the field. So that's Mary. Okay, now let's see what it looks like to take an entire studio audience of NBC in Burbank, California, into the future.
Peering into the future with progression hypnotherapy. During the last break, Dr. Goldberg put the whole audience under and is now...
Allow the details, the emotions, the perception to play itself out. You'll have complete memories of this event as you've been...
Well, in my current life, the future of my current life, I imagine that I saw myself in the hospital giving birth to a baby boy, and my husband there, and my husband taking me to the hospital.
Okay.
And then, like in the
How long in the future was this?
This was not maybe 5 more years from now.
Did you
not
feel
a
the
real long
emotions
time.
of the pride of having that child?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I felt really very good about it.
Felt real? Is this something that you're... Where did you go?
Well, in this lifetime, I saw myself married at the beach with horses, and I was wealthy, and I was very happy. And I moved forward to 3614,
Okay.
and I was in a space vehicle. I think it was some sort of vehicle where I think I was steering it. It wasn't really a flight
A craft
crew.
that you were flying, you mean?
I was in there. I don't know exactly who was doing it, but...
Future life.
I felt happy. I saw I had a child, and I was saying goodbye to her
Now,
before.
let me ask you a question. Did you feel in any way endangered doing the age progression or the future life progression during this exercise?
No.
Perfectly safe.
Felt okay? We keep struggling to get along.
Democracy is here.
Anything come through about this show, Deep into the Future? Anything?
Well, the show is here. You, I don't know, Will. But,
Okay, all right.
okay, so now, remember that she heard her date's 3614. That's the 37th century, okay? Very far forward. We're going to see an example in a moment of something 100 years later, and this is the case of Sequestra. Now, Sequestra's case is reported in my Past Lives, Future Lives Revealed book. This is a very complicated case of a woman who was able to overcome ulcerative colitis. Anybody know what that is? It's not a fun syndrome. People have to go to the bathroom about 50 times a day and blood comes out. It's very nasty. They treat it with steroids. It's very difficult, very low success rate, and pretty much codependent on medication the rest of your life. Her case is very complicated, and I don't want to go into all the details. It would be a lecture in itself. But she was able to go into the future to show about the resolution of her karmic issues and some of the technology of the 38th century. Now, what's interesting further about Sequestra's case, and this is what I love about the cynical media. I was being interviewed by a television host. This is during his show. This is a local show several years ago in the Northeast of the United States. And he was one of these people who, you know, the only reason he interviewed me because the producer booked me on the show. He could care less about the field. Very cynical, very skeptical, just very unhappy. You know, you ever notice, you never see a happy skeptic? You ever notice that? Because in their world, they don't believe in God. In their world, they die, there's a black hole for the eternity. So they're all counting like a sand dial here. You know, the sand is going down and their life is going down. Okay, so I said, look, you're welcome to be skeptical, but you know, lighten up. Okay, he says, you know, doctor, he says, I don't even believe half the cases that I read about in your book. And I said, really? He says, yeah. I said, you remember that case about Sequestra, the woman who went into the 38th century? He said, yeah, even that one, especially that one. I said, well, she's the next guest. Okay? All right. So this is Sequestra on an old show in Baltimore. This is before Oprah Winfrey went to Chicago. You'll hear her voice narrating this in the beginning. And then later on, I did her show in Chicago when she did the national show. But here's an example of a woman progressing into a future life 1,700 years from now. All right. And what is happening to you now, Sequestra, that you feel so uncomfortable about?
They're going to punish me.
Who is going to punish you?
The Arakatha.
And who are the Arakatha?
They are the rulers of our people. And I have been trained since a child to fulfill a certain job for them because I have a physical body and they do not. They can, at times, enter bodies or through mind control and sound can control the thoughts and deeds of individuals.
All right, very good. Now, Sequestra, sleep now and rest now. Keep those emotions with you. It's okay. Let's move to the resolution of this problem or situation one way or another. I want you to tell me what happens, what your response is, and I want you to bring up the emotions that exist with you at this time. On the count of 5. Number 1, bringing up the feelings and the result of this problem. Number 2, farther forward. 3, halfway there. 4, almost there. Number 5. Number 5. All right, Sequestra, what has happened now?
They overcame me while I was under biogenesis because this is my most vulnerable time.
What is biogenesis?
Biogenesis is the way that I am allowed to rest. I have rest periods that last approximately 22 minutes, and this happens once every 3 days.
What do they do to you during the biogenesis?
This is when they surgically implanted a diode into my brain as punishment for losing my temper and almost annihilating several thousand people.
How does this leave you after this operation? How does this limit your functions?
It limits the amount of anger I can show because they have interrupted the electrical impulse from one brain section to another. I get angry, but I do not have extreme rage, and therefore I am not dangerous anymore.
Okay, very good. Sleep now and rest, Sequestra. That's very good. Sleep now and rest. Now, I'm going to be bringing you out of this. You're going to be returning back in time. You'll be back as Audrey. You'll have complete memories and understanding of what you just explored. You'll be able to remember even the emotions, and you'll be able to describe that. On the count of 5. Number 1, you're moving backwards in time. 2, farther back. 3, very good. Halfway there. 4, almost there. Number 5, awaken, wide awake, and refreshed.
Audrey's case as Sequestra has many interesting facets to it, but you notice that when I show these clips, you notice how I always show them coming out of trance. And the reason being is I want to illustrate the fact that when you're going through all these experiences, whether they be past or future, parallel lives, whether you're overcoming psychic attack or whatever it is, you're perfectly safe. And even people who are going through like, wow, all these emotions, like you saw with the Rosie case yesterday, you notice how she was very tense and upset, and all of a sudden, I said, sleep now and rest, relax, and all of a sudden they stop, and they're back into calmness. So there's no danger involved. Okay, now, we're going into what's called the fun part of this talk here, and this is about time travelers. Just to give you a little background, we're going to show an example of a clip of a woman who actually accesses and contacts a time traveler from the 36th century. And you're going to see a little clip of one of her future lives in the 36th century. This was a TV show I was on in Seattle, Washington, and to show you an example of how when you do television in this field, they put a lot of time pressures on you, okay? And you'll see an example of how even though they have ridiculous time pressures, a patient can do its thing and the universe can cooperate to have everything work out. But let me just give a quick background about time travelers. What happens in approximately the year 3050, there's a man named Tatos, is T-A-A-T-O-S, and he is the person who discovers time travel by enlarging a wormhole and coming back in time. The actual mechanism of enlarging a wormhole, this is very technical physics, is actually known today. We just don't have the ability to do time travel today because we don't have certain things like exotic matter and a couple of other things that we don't have, that won't be around for 1,000 years. But the actual mathematical model was actually published in a physical review letter in 1988 by Kip Thorne, who's at Caltech in Pasadena. He's a brilliant astrophysicist, a Genius Award winner, and his article, of course, brought a lot of controversies in the field, if you can imagine. This is a scientific article, mathematical models. You can't argue math. Well, a lot of people tried to challenge him, and guess what? Nobody succeeded. In fact, Kip Thorne's reputation was made in many ways because he was the one who had a bet with Stephen Hawking. You know who Stephen Hawking is, right? And he won the bet. It was about black holes, the existence of black holes. So Kip is a pretty bright dude. Okay, so Tatos discovers time travel, and the way he did it was initially he sent objects back in time, okay, to test it before humans were sent back. And then what happens is back in time, going back into, let's say, ancient Greece, he would send back like an image of what's going on in the future. So in the ancient Grecian times and Rome, those were the mystery school civilizations, what happened, they would see these visions, not realizing they were futuristic experiments in time travel. Okay, so finally he goes back in time. What does he choose to go to initially? Egypt.